intro here. So, for those who don't know, Mike Reinhold holds a host of certifications from DPT to CSCS to ATC, and he's considered a world renowned leader in the field of physical therapy, sports medicine, fitness, and sports performance. As a physical therapist, athletic trainer, and certified strength and conditioning specialist, he's used his expertise in a variety of settings to people in regards to restoring, optimizing, and enhancing their performance. He's most notably worked extensively with a variety of professional athletes from every major sport, with emphasis on the care of throwing injuries in baseball players. He's currently the co-founder and president of Champion Physical Therapy and Performance, a physical therapist and performance training facility just outside of Boston in Waltham, Massachusetts. He is also currently the senior medical advisor for the Chicago White Sox and director of baseball performance at Northeastern University, where he's been instrumental in the restructuring and building of the high performance and medical teams there. And with that, Mike, take it away.
Wow, thanks, Jason. That was good. I hope Stan was taking notes. That was a pretty solid introduction there. So,
Well, to be fair, I
thanks
stole it from your website. So,
dang it. But no, thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to be on this and part of this. I mean, obviously, giving back to the baseball community, especially at this time, is super important. But getting to work with a bunch of the NCAA athletic trainers, especially those that work in baseball, is obviously pretty fun. So hopefully we can, we can get a little bit something out of this. And what I'm kind of trying to tell everybody is like, yeah, we're in a jam right here as a society, but I think if we kind of put our heads down and focus a little bit, if we can try to find some ways to come out of this ahead, hopefully, we can do some things to better ourselves and our programs over time. So that's how we're approaching it, right? Instead of focusing on the negative, we're trying to figure out like what projects can we do and which ways can we kind of enhance kind of the services we perform. So, hopefully you guys are reflecting upon that yourselves too. So Jason asked me to talk a little bit about the science behind the safety and efficacy of weighted ball training. And, obviously I think we, as baseball athletic trainers, we're seeing quite a bit of, weighted ball training that's going on. This is one of those things, just like anything else. Like I think sometimes popularity may come before the science and the data. So I think we're starting to actually get to a point where we have some of the science and we understand a little bit behind what's going on with these programs, that we can actually start having some intelligent conversations about these programs. So that's kind of my goal today. And really, I'm going to highlight some of the studies that we've done, but talk a little bit about some of the other ones that are out there in the literature as well. So for me, I think we all know this, right? I'm talking to the wrong crowd because you're the ones that deal with all these, but baseball pitching injuries are just going up at an alarming rate. And it's crazy. So most of you guys know of ASMI, the American Sports Medicine Institute, but Dr. Andrews and Dr. Fleissig, Dr. Wilk, they all have a yearly injuries in baseball seminar that they host in January. Many of you are familiar with it, I'm sure. If you're not, you should definitely try to go to that next January. But every year we've been kind of doing this. I think they're in, somewhere in the mid 30s. And, I just hit my 20th year that I've been speaking at it. And I got up there, and one of the first things I said was, it's been 20 years, right? But injury rates are getting worse. So apparently these meetings aren't helping, right? We're failing as a society. And I don't know if it's really that we're failing, or maybe we're just not catching up with some of the current trends, because I'm now kind of at the beginning of my third decade of working within baseball sports medicine now. And it's amazing to see the evolution between the different decades, right? So if you're just new to baseball, this current era is different than just even, probably, I don't know, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, right? But certainly from 10 and 20 years ago, that it's completely changed. So, the thing that we're seeing that partly correlates more than anything else is this huge emphasis on velocity in the game. Right. And it's going to be interesting here too, because there are quite a few statistics that show that velocity is important. But I think you could also dig into the data a little bit and see that maybe velocity is not the most important thing all the time with everybody. You actually look at some of the better teams nowadays that are using some of the statistics and analytics within baseball. You can see that they're actually throwing fastballs less often than they have been. So you guys, I think, are in a particular jam in college because you have this small window of opportunity where people, it's almost like a 3-year showcase, right? That they're trying to do. The coaching staff, everybody's trying to win, obviously. So it's it's like go big or go home. But then all the players are trying to showcase themselves too. So we have this like this real huge emphasis on velocity, right? And this is what you see at like a 14U perfect game tournament nowadays, right? This is the most important thing in the world. So right now we're going through a tough time with the economy, right? The stock market's crashing. If you're paying attention to those things right now, if I were you, I'd buy some stock in this Stalker radar gun company, because I think they're going to go up once we get out of this quarantine period and we stop social distancing. So, looking at more, graphs, I like looking at this, right? So this is, when you're looking for the most sense of what's going on in the world, you go to Google, right? So these are Google search trends for the term baseball velocity and weighted baseballs. And you can see how baseball velocities is just spiking, just people typing in baseball velocity in Google. And weighted balls, really, again, like nobody really, looked into this before 2012, right? So it's kind of interesting to see this, and you got to wonder, we're trying so hard to stop all these injuries and change things, but then can we combat these types of things that are happening simultaneously? So we know velocity, it's a physics equation. Velocity correlates to elbow stress. Of course it does, right? It's just physics. We know that. Try explaining that to a 12-year-old or their parent, right? That's the hard part. But we've seen this in studies in both high school and professional athletes, that there is a correlation between velocity and stress. So there's no wonder, if you were to graph out things like the average, or the mean fastball velocity in Major League Baseball and the amount of Tommy Johns, and you can see that these trends are both ticking upward. So we have this increased tick up in velocity, this increased tick up in weighted balls, the increased tick up in Tommy John procedures that are being performed. You got to wonder if you start seeing some correlations between this. So great study by Dr. Camp and Stan Conte is on this presentation, I believe, here too. Kind of really been highlighting all the epidemiology and some of these injuries that we're having here. But I love this graph, right? And when I first saw it from a slide from Stan at some presentation we were at, I'm not even sure which conference we were at, but when I first saw him use this slide and look at it, it really stuck out to me. Everybody, I think, if we could talk and I could see you, right, and you could raise your hands and say, like, do you think we're having a Tommy John epidemic in baseball, right? That's the buzzword. Like, you can Google that in USA Today and Sports Illustrated, or write articles about this Tommy John epidemic, right? You guys have heard that. So usually I'd have you raise your hands and see if you agree. So, well, that's this red line. This is the Tommy John epidemic in Major League Baseball, right? And yeah, no, that went up, right? And that's a lot. That went up. That's the number of Tommy John surgeries in Major League Baseball. But look at these lines. You know what that green line is? That's minor league baseball. So red is major league, green is minor league, and blue is cumulative, putting them both together. This is what's getting all the publicity. That's what's getting all the press that everybody's talking about. This is astronomical, right? Look at how much more injuries there are in minor league baseball. And by the way, I would include this in NCAA and college too. It's those lower levels. You can see these huge spikes, right? So it's a gigantic spike. And you know what it looks a lot like? Anybody see what this graph is? Anyone figure this one out? So the green is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, right? And black is Bitcoin, right? So I think we're seeing kind of a similar trend there between those two. Hopefully we don't have such a devastating kind of end to that we've kind of seen. But what's essentially happening is that we have this focus on velocity development now, even with training. That's the evolution of baseball, right? When I first started, players didn't throw as much as they did all winter. Players did not work on velocity development all freaking winter, right? Everyone wasn't throwing as much. Now, if you're not working on velocity almost throughout the entire calendar year, you feel like you're falling behind. That's what everybody wants you to do. In college programs, a lot of them I don't think are doing a good job with just forcing these kids to just throw more and more and more. Fall ball, winter velocity programs, all these things. It's so much going on. So the topic of this presentation is weight balls. There's other ways and other things that go into velocity programs, but we're going to focus on that. So, before we even get into it, let's ask, the number one question first. We're going to talk about the safety and the efficacy. Let's just get this out of the way first. Do weighted balls work, right? And it's interesting. I think the majority of people would say this, right? They would say, do weighted balls work? And they're like, well, yeah, weighted balls work, right? I think that's what everybody says now. Yeah, weighted balls work. And the question is, like, do they really? And that's like kind of an interesting kind of question to talk about. We've all gotten to the point where everybody's told us that weighted balls work for so long. And there's all these anecdotal stories, but man, is it hard to build a well-designed controlled study that actually shows these things. But if you look at it, there are definitely some trends that show that there is a significant increase in velocity by some of these programs. I myself published one of them. So we published this in Sports Health in 2018, and we're going to talk about this a little bit today in the presentation, but we showed a 3.3% increase in velocity by performing a 6-week weighted ball program in high school players. So that's pretty cool, right? Let me see. I don't know. Got something popped up on my screen. Can you guys see that? I don't know. Can you see that, Jason?
Nope, just your presentation.
Oh, okay, got it. I got somebody tried to annotate the slide and it's like covering my screen. Can I close it for 1 second? I got to do this. Sorry, Sean.
Nope.
You tried to annotate the screen. Sorry. Good.
I apologize.
Yeah, come on, Sean, clean it up, man. All right. So what we get here. So again, my study showed 3.3. Dr. Erickson just published this, not too recently, but 7.3%. That's outstanding. I think we're going to dig in a little deeper into that study, but that's a big percentage increase in velocity, right? That's essentially saying, you have a college player that throws 90. They're going to perform this program for a few months and they're going to throw 97. I mean, sign me up, right? Like I don't think you need to tell me anything else. I think that's it right there. But Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Ahmad actually got together and did a good review of some of the studies that we're going to also talk about too. So there's a bunch that are out there. I think if you stick to those three, I think you're going to get a good snapshot of that. But I want you to keep this in mind. Most of the studies that have been published out there use balls ranging from 4 to 17 ounces. And to be honest with you, most of them are just 4 to 6 ounces. And I'm pretty sure all of you guys have seen this. We're throwing way more than that. We're throwing 1 pound balls, 2 ounce balls, 2 pound balls, everything in between, even though those haven't really been studied. But we're showing that there is some potential benefit. But hold up. And this is what I just want to get across again, to the point on this. Like, yes, I do think some weighted ball programs can be effective. But let's keep this in mind. This is the graph from the studies from Dr. Ahmad's studies. Many of these are old. Look at these. I mean, the 60s and the 70s. I don't even know what those programs were. Right? That's crazy. So let me go back. Sorry. Look at the 60s and 70s. There's really only 2 modern day programs, and one of them didn't even show a change in velocity. Right? So, it's not like we're seeing that there's a ton of evidence that these programs work. Many of them are old. Most of them are poor quality. If you actually look at all of them, they're all low to very low, other than my study. Sorry. But the quality was just super low. So I don't even know how well we can even trust some of those studies. Right? Some of them don't even have a control group. Dr. Erickson's study that they just published, they looked at youth pitchers from age 10 to 17, which is a gigantic difference, by the way. I really wish they broke those down into different buckets of young and old, to be honest. But they didn't have a control group. So what they did was they did a 15-week program, right? And this is the title of the study, by the way. Training with lighter baseballs increases velocity without increasing injury risk. Holy smokes. That's fantastic, right? Sign me up. I want to use lighter baseballs because I can gain velocity without the injury risk. That's what the article says, right? That's what the title says. But they didn't have a control group. They didn't follow the subjects into the next season to see if they had any injuries. And if you really break down the program, I don't even really think they did a weighted ball training program. They had a 15-week program with 25 total training sessions over 15 weeks. They didn't even use weighted balls until halfway through, until week 12, session 12, right? And then they only threw underload balls from 3 to 4 ounces in just a third of the session, 9 sessions, 15 weeks, 9 times they threw lightweight balls. But what they did, and this is to give them a lot of credit here, I'm going to give them a ton of credit for this study. They did a great job. They went up 7.3% in velocity by essentially doing a well-designed, controlled throwing and strength and power development program. And they dabbled with some light balls for 9 sessions in a 15-week period, but they did an amazing job at a nice strength and power development program. So without a control group, we can't say that training with lighter balls increases velocity or decreases or doesn't increase injury risk. We can't say either of those things. Those are both completely invalid statements. But what we can say was their program, which was heavy on strength and power development, like med ball tosses, rotational things, the traditional things we would do in the gym, they did a great job increasing velocity there. So I think this is a great study. I don't think the title in any way represents the study, but you should really look into this. The problem is nobody on Twitter gets past the title, right? So everybody's like, all right, well, lighter baseballs work, right? When I actually think there's a ton of great things that could come out of the study, but it's not necessarily that lighter baseball works. The other thing that I want to keep in mind here is not everybody sees gains here. So just looking at this study, there's only 11 studies here that have looked at this, and 4 of them didn't show any statistical gains in velocity. right? And if you actually break down some of the other research, there's a paper by Marsh from Driveline, actually, the one study from Driveline, they didn't even show a change in velocity. They showed that their subjects in their 6-week program did not increase velocity in a Driveline program, right? And if you break our study down, which did show a 3.3% gain in velocity, when you break down the two groups, our weighted ball group and our control group, it's not super exciting, if you ask me. In the weighted ball group, 80% of them improved their velocity, but 12% went down. But in the control group, 67% improved their velocity and 14% went down. So control groups improved too, right? And you got to keep that in mind a little bit when you look at some studies like mine and even that previous study we showed for Dr. Erickson here that kind of showed that change in there. Remember, for every inch you grow, your velocity goes up about 1.5 miles per hour. And for every year you age, it goes up almost 1.5 miles per hour. Those are just statistics that have been published that shows that. So again, Dr. Erickson's program, 3-month program, is more than 3 months, 15 weeks. If a player grew like 2 inches, they had a growth spurt during that, or even an inch and a half or something like that over 3 months, I mean, they're going to go up 4 miles an hour. That's kind of the science of working with a 12-year-old, right? We have somebody go from 60 to 65. I mean, that's a pretty big difference. So there's a bunch of problems still with weighted balls. They may be effective in enhancing velocity, and I think they do. I just think it's probably not as much as we think. But right now, we've been ingrained to say weighted balls work. They increase velocity because, that's a fact. Everybody thinks that. If you look at the science, I don't know if it's quite supporting that yet. So the problem is, though, is we're taking huge leaps based on this, right? Well, if a study showed you go up with 4 and 6 ounce balls, imagine what you go up if we used an 18-ounce ball. It would triple, right? And everybody starts going up heavier and heavier with the balls. And I think what's happened is we're pushing our limits even though we still don't know things. We don't know the mechanism of why this velocity goes up. We don't know what happens with the kinematics and kinetics of this. And we don't know the short-term and long-term safety profiles of this depending on the dose. And I think that's really our problem. So we started to look into this and we started to answer some of these questions, right? So Dr. Glenn Fleissig has published the first study in kind of our series that we collaborated on with some of our things. And he looked at just from the biomechanics side of it and showed essentially there wasn't a ton of biomechanical difference between them. I want to talk more specifically about the safety and the efficacy of them from our programs. So what we did is we teamed up for a 6-week weighted ball program. Okay? We published this in Sports Health in 2018 and essentially looked at a bunch of different things. It was funny. So 2 things came out of the study. We won the 2019 AOSSM CISC Award, which is a big award. That's the best research paper of the year award, right? So we were applauded for this. This was the #1 downloaded journal article from 2019 from Sports Health Journal. So we won that award. The other award we won was the most hated by pitching coaches award on Twitter, right? Which you can see everybody on Twitter try to destroy this and eat this study up. And we'll kind of talk about some of the comments that they kind of said about this. But showing you a little bit about the study, we used 44 13 to 18-year-old baseball players, right? So high school kids, 44. It's a decent amount. We had a weighted ball group and a control group, and we measured their range of motion, strength, velocity, as well as their valgus stress and angular velocity using the MODA sleeve before and after a 6-week throwing program. Okay, so we performed a weighted ball throwing program that's based on some of the common programs that are out there. It was 6 weeks. They threw 3 times a week, and they used weights ranging from 2 ounces to 32 ounces or 2 pounds that gradually increased over the course of the program. They didn't just start with this. They gradually increased. We had a control group, and they only did their normal standard throwing of 5-ounce balls. And all of them trained with us. So they performed our programs and got strong and all that fun sorts of things. But both groups did that. So our independent variable was very precise, which is whether or not they used weighted balls or just a 5-ounce ball. So if we look at the program, we had a gradual ramp up. We used kneeling, rocker, and run and gun throws and just slowly built them all up because we didn't want to just jolt the system. All the players had been throwing, so they warmed up. And you can see each week they slowly progressed. Week 1, they did 3 throws from each weight at 75% effort, total of 15 throws. That's it, right? That's not a lot of volume in week 1, right? Week 2 just went up a little bit, and you can see it slowly increased up. But one of the big things that they said on Twitter was like, man, they use 2-pound run and gun balls. That's ridiculous. I'd never do that. Well, they are doing that, and they're doing things like pivot pickoffs and other exercises like that with 2 pounds and more, up to 5-pound balls, and those are pretty stressful. But I want to keep in mind here that we had a total of 540 total throws over 6 weeks. Only the entire 6-week program, we only threw a 2-pound ball for around 18 total times, of 3% of the study. So I'm trying to tell everybody that kind of said that was a criticism. Was I think we should focus on the 97% of the other throws and not those 3% of the throws. So again, what did we show? Well, velocity went up. Weight ball group went up about 2.3 miles per hour, which is a 3.4% increase in velocity. We kind of talked about that breakdown a little bit. There was no statistical difference in the control group. Remember, again, not everybody went up. There wasn't a change in peak valgus stress or angular velocity in the group, and I think that was an important finding too. We were happy about that. But two of the big things that matter to us in the athletic training world, right, is range of motion and strength. What we showed was the weighted ball group went their external rotation and then thus their total rotational range of motion went up by 5 degrees over the 6-week program. So their layback went back 5 more degrees and they opened up their total arc by 5 degrees. There was no difference in the non-dominant arm or the control group. How about this one, the strength, right? So we measured shoulder strength during all of this too. There was a significant increase in external rotation strength in the control group, not the weighted ball group. It was a 13% increase in external rotation in the shoulder. To be honest with you, we were most excited about this because this shows us that our programs that we do at Champion and the things that we do with our college kids at Northeastern and even our pro guys, that they work. We increase the strength in the shoulder if you follow our program. But if you simultaneously use weighted balls, you don't increase your strength. So you could actually argue weighted balls inhibit strength gains based on that finding right there. Well, what about injuries? Because that's the big one. We had 4 total injuries. That was 24% of the subjects in this. 2 during the study and 2 in the following season. And that's an important one. I think you guys are gonna probably really relate to this. Most people don't get hurt in the winter when they're doing a weighted ball program. They get hurt that season. That coming up there. We had, Tommy Johns, Leclerc stress fractures, right? We're seeing these things. 2 of those people that had the big injuries, they had an increase in external rotation of 10 degrees. Right. So it seems like, we don't have statistics on this, but it seems like the more you gain a layback, the more you're going to increase stress. And again, that is just simple physics, right? That's the easy part. No injuries in the control group, both during the program in the subsequent season that was coming up. So we had a control group, we followed them over into the next season and really wanted to study those things. Those are pretty important findings. So we thought, man, wow, in 6 weeks, players go up at 5 degrees on average. We had some guys go up 10, 15 degrees. Those are the ones that got injured. They go up 5 degrees. Well, what's the acute effect of throwing a ball? Because is that a cumulative thing, or was it like certain ball types do that? Or maybe we can find like a certain weight maybe that isn't as stressful as another weight, right? So we wanted to look into this. So our next study that we all teamed up to do was, again, the acute effects of throwing weighted balls now. And this is, it's going to be published in the next Sports Health. It's been accepted, and we're doing the proofs right now as we speak. But what we did is we looked at 17 high school pitchers again. The mean age was 17, and we had 3 testing sessions where they came into our facility to work with us. So one was an underload day where they threw 5-ounce, 4-ounce, and 2-ounce balls. So the second session, we randomized this, but the second session was light overload, where it was just 5, 6, 9-ounce, and then a heavy overload was 5, 16, and 32 ounce. You see, we always had a baseline of 5 ounces for the day, which is the standard ball, and then we had an underload, light overload, and heavy overload day. And what we wanted to do is an acute change in the range of motion as well as the stress and the velocity. So we measured their range of motion before and after a session where they did the kneeling, rocker, run, and gun kind of throws with these variety of weights. So we saw some things that we expected, right? As the velocity of the ball increases, right, the heavier the ball, the change in the velocity. Obviously, the slower it comes out. We know that. The lighter the ball comes out faster. We know that. We saw a change in stress, too, where, again, the heavier the ball actually has a decreasing amount of peak valgus stress. And again, the Twitter sphere went bananas on this. They're like, oh, weighted balls have less stress than a 5-ounce ball, so they must be safe, right? And that's what they kind of said. But that's peak stress. Not everybody kind of talks about that, but peak stress isn't what we need to be talking about here. Peak stress is just one number. It's not the overall stress over the entire kind of throw. But here's the alarming thing. Here's the change in range of motion we saw. So we had these guys throw, I think it was 18 throws. We measured their range of motion before and after. Right? No statistical difference in change in range of motion with underload. But if you look at the light overload and the heavy overload days, you can see a statistically significant increase in external rotation that went up. It was almost 4 degrees with light overload, and it was 8 degrees with the heavy overload. 8 degrees in 5 minutes after 18 throws of layback. And we were stunned. We were surprised by this. And this was the expression I was having because I was literally the one measuring them. I've been measuring people for studies now for over 20 years. And we have the same kids that come back. I'd go to push them back and be like, whoa, just keep going into external rotation. And that was my expression. And that was the point where I said, I think we may be done with this weighted ball research because these are our kids, right? These are kids that are trained in our facility. And that is not the facial expression you want when you're in the middle of a study. So what have we learned? Well, weighted programs do not change pitching mechanics, right? So that's one thing Dr. Fleisig's study showed. It doesn't change mechanics. A lot of people will argue that you can do some drills with them and that'll help pattern that over time. It may be right. I think I would argue if you did the same reps of throws with a 5 ounce ball, that you would probably get the same mechanical change too. It's the fact that you're doing the reps over and over then that is probably better for neuromuscular control. As we know, for motor learning specialists, right? That's our world as rehabilitation specialists. You want to have some specificity of training, right? So me doing a 1 pound ball with a drill with my arm, I don't know how much that carries over into my pitching mechanics. But me doing it with 5 ounces and trying to do it a little bit more there, I think that kind of makes more sense. But anyway, we know weighted balls also do not increase arm strength. We know they don't increase arm strength, and you could argue they inhibit strength based on the results of our study. Those are things they don't do that have been speculated. They may be effective at increasing velocity. We showed that they did. I think they are. I just think maybe not as much as we think they are, but they are. But why the gain, right? And this is the thing that I think we finally figured out with our studies now. It's this gain in external rotation, the amount of layback that we had now that we've seen in 2 studies that we've published, both acute and chronic adaptation. And biomechanically, we know that layback, more external rotation, correlates to velocity, but it also correlates to increased shoulder and elbow forces in a bunch of studies, not just one study. So we know this. It's this physics equation. So the question is, yes, we do gain some velocity. Some people do, but at what cost? And maybe that's why not everybody gains velocity. What we have seen anecdotally, right, is that people will gain some and then maybe even come down sometime. So maybe we're just seeing this quick kind of like this quick gain and layback. Their velo goes up, but then the more they do it, they kind of start to plateau, and some even go down. Some get injured, right? So we start to see that progression. It's kind of interesting. We also did. We've been doing this in multiple people, and I will say people that have gains when they do it one winter and then go and try to do it again the next winter. Most people don't have gains again that second winter, right? Because just another interesting thing. But it's really at what cost? Like, does this look normal to you? Right? So the more we increase that, the more stress we're just going to kind of continue putting on the body. And trust me, guys, the injuries we're seeing are alarming. You guys just work with like 15 pitchers a year, right? I work with hundreds. What I'm seeing is alarming, right? In both the quantity and the quality. The amount of injuries we're seeing and the type of injuries that we're seeing are crazy. So I never used to see injuries like this back in the day. Lat tears, a pec tear on one pitch. How does that happen, right? That's crazy. Rib fractures and thoracic outlet kind of like, coming out of the woodwork, right? The types of injuries we're seeing are crazy. Subscap's another big one we're seeing. So we're starting to see just these big injuries that we're seeing, but we're seeing way more, right? And anecdotally in baseball, you guys experience this quite a bit. A study just came out. I think it was Dr. Camp's. No, it might have been an NCAA study, but I forget the reference off the top of my head. But they showed on average with D1 NCAA baseball, there's one Tommy John a year. One Tommy John a year on average. Okay, so you guys are the NCAA trainers in baseball right now. Did you have more than one this year? If you had more than one, then you're above the mean right there. If you had 3, 4, or 5, then you got to carefully look at what you guys are doing and wonder if we're doing a little bit too much. And I know around us, we've had 2 schools just come in and blindly start a weighted ball program on everybody. Everybody gets a weighted ball program. One of them had 5 Tommy Johns one year, and one had 6. Crazy, right? That doesn't make any sense. What we're seeing is alarming, right? So the question is, are we pushing past our physiological limits? Are we not taking a break from throwing? Is that what it is, maybe? Right? If we look at our original research that goes back now and looks at how people get injured, you are 5 times more likely to get injured if you pitch for more than 8 months out of the year. 5 times, guys. That's enormous. That's 500%. That's not like just a little 5 number. That's 500% more likely to get injured if you pitch for more than 8 months out of a year. You know what happened? Everybody stopped throwing bullpens and started doing and got away from that in the winter to not pitch. And what they started doing was weighted balls, long toss, pull downs, aggressive velo programs. What they don't know is it's not pitching so much that gets us hurt. It's throwing all year round that gets us hurt. And the body could care less if it's long toss, weighted balls, or pitching. It just measures stress, right? And so you can argue that these people are doing too much. I ask all my weighted ball guys this question. It's usually when they're coming to see me with pain. Most of them say this. Here's a good typical example. Had a kid come in, D1 kid come into me. He trained all winter, weighted ball program all winter. Comes to me in the spring. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, well, my shoulder's killing me. I can't throw. I'm like, okay, what happened? He's like, well, nothing really changed, but my velo went up a little bit. I did this weighted ball program. It was cranky while I was doing it, but once I started pitching it, got, I just can't pitch anymore. It's sore. I'm like, okay. I mean, how do you think that went? He's like, it went awesome. This is the best I've ever felt. I go, time out. You just said your shoulder hurts and you can't pitch. This is the best you've ever felt because you're on the DL, dude. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So you can see again, like, everybody's been told this works. Everybody's told this is safe, especially when you see some like articles that say they're effective and safe, right? But maybe they're not. These are the things we got to keep in mind. So we hear these things from kids all the time, and that's how like we start to see them evolving in our clinic. But the question is, are we even focusing on the wrong thing, right? You guys know this. This study just came out in Sports Biomechanics. 86% of the velocity of your arm comes from the angular velocity of trunk flexion and rotation. We all know that. That's why we do med ball throws and power drills and stuff like that. So are we focusing on the wrong thing by doing weight balls? We're focusing on the 14% instead of the 86%. And most of the guys, most freshmen in college are still little string beans that weigh 160, 180 pounds and they're 6'2". Those guys aren't the worst thing you could do for those guys is just put them on a weighted ball program where you're not taking advantage of the whole kinematic sequence. That makes sense? So are weighted balls evil? I mean, I hate to sound a little pessimistic with what I'm saying. I don't think they're evil. I actually use them a little bit. I just think we're overdosing. I think we're doing it way, way too much. We still don't know the appropriate dose, but I think it's pretty clear that what we are doing is probably too much. What can we do? Well, I hate to say it, but this is the curve that we're seeing, right? This is that study again from Stan and Dr. Camp that shows this big curve. I think we got to flatten the curve, guys. I think this is important now. If we make no changes right now, this is just going to keep spiking. If we practice some social distancing with some of our youth from weighted baseballs, I think we're going to start flattening the curve. I hate to say it, but the current generation of kids right now, I think they're the herd that's trying to get immunity for these kids. I think we need to get to the kids right now and tell them that this is not how you develop to become a baseball player, is by having a 14-year-old kid do a weighted ball program, nothing else. I don't think that's working. So that's how I propose we get better, and that's how we flatten the curve, by getting the current generation of youth, so when they get to you guys in college and they get to me in pro sports, and we're not dealing with this problem as much. Thank you guys very much for dealing with me for those 20 minutes and listening. So hope that was beneficial, and hope you guys learned a little bit. And then I think Jason, we're going to open it up to some Q&A now, or a little discussion group. Is that kind of the plan?
Yeah, I really appreciate, obviously, you taking the time, Mike. And like you said, right now, I think is a great time for everybody to educate themselves and help baseball in any way possible by getting better. So anybody who wants to ask Mike some questions, fire away.
One at a time.
I have a question. Do you feel like arm slot affects the amount of injury you get with weighted balls? Because I've seen with my guys who are more submarine or 3/4, they start having more issues when they're starting their weighted ball program, and so we pull back on how much they're doing, and most of the time I get them completely off and we see less injuries. Whereas the guys who are more over the top, I don't see a lot of injury coming from them. So do you think arm slot is part of that?
That's kind of interesting. Traditional, like, sidearm type people, believe it or not, if you looked at the kinematics of the body, it doesn't change abduction angle of the shoulder. I'm trying to make sure you can see my camera, right? Mm-hmm. What tends to happen is we have more trunk side tilt to this direction, right? So it's kind of interesting. And don't get me wrong, there are now some kids that are pushing the limit to get really super low to get a little bit more movement. I think that's happening. But the majority of people that are submariners and sidearm guys, believe it or not, just have some trunk lean. So I don't think there's a difference in the arm with those players. I would just wonder if maybe they're a different body type, right? Most submarine guys I know are really like super lax, a little bit more lanky, right? They have a longer arm. So I think maybe, you may have just stumbled across something, Brandy, that maybe those guys with those long, lanky arms, that lever of the weighted ball is a little bit more stressful for them. So that's a really good question. Thanks, Brandy.
Of course.
Is that your last name, or are you from Boston? Are you Brandy Boston?
No, that's my last name.
I love it. That's awesome. Anybody else? Some questions?
Mike, this is John Travnick from Sam Houston State. Thanks for the talk. I really appreciate it.
You got it.
So I had a little question. You kind of threw in there at the end that you do use weighted balls a little bit in your program. what is a qualifier for you to use them? What's your purpose for them? What drills do you use, and why do you use them?
It's a great. I do use them, right? So the first thing I think we talk about is there's a definitive yes and a definitive no, right? So the definitive no is probably a skeletally immature kid, or somebody that's just they're not ready, skeletally immature. So that's talking like youth, high school. There's probably plenty in there. The definitive yes is like a 28-year-old guy that's in the minor leagues and he's about to be released, and he wants to try to put on a few more miles and see if that helps him, tick. I don't know the chance of success that they're going to have, right? I don't think that that's kind of like like that unicorn we're trying to find. I don't know how successful that is, but then everybody else is really in the middle. But what I try to do is I try to bucket the guys, and we started to say, like, how do you enhance performance? One is strength and conditioning. Two is a solid arm care program, solid arm strength, good scap stability, dynamic stability, all those sorts of things, right? We have those are the big ones. The third one's age and maturity. We can't control that ourselves. And then the last one is finally some throwing things. And I think that's kind of the interesting part is stuff like weighted balls. I want to make sure you've maximized your other three buckets before we get to that fourth bucket, right? And that freshman kid that's 160, 6'4", he hasn't maximized his age maturity bucket yet. So he's not getting weighted balls, right? Then, okay, are you in the gym? Are you lifting? Can you hit your metrics in the gym? Oh, you haven't? Well, that's our low hanging fruit, guys. Let's focus on that before we get into weighted balls. Then, oh, you've never even heard of a shoulder program? You've never done arm care things like your rotator cuff weak? Why on earth would I give you a weighted ball program, right? That doesn't make sense. Let's work on our buckets. Believe it or not, most of those guys are going to go up in velocity just by maximizing them. And then if we're trying to kind of manage that other thing, I think we're good. So that's a generalized version, but what do I do? Believe it or not, I don't think most of the drills that are being performed are really that effective. They're all just variations of throwing a weighted ball. What we learned from our study, quite simply, was that by throwing a weighted ball, you gain layback. I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you're on your knee, your side, you're doing it reverse, you're doing like a little karate chop with it. It doesn't really matter. It's the effect of throwing the weighted ball increases your layback. So whatever drill helps for you. I particularly like rocker drills because I think that just helps sequence the upper half and get some separation the way I like. So I tend to do a little bit more rocker, but I'll be honest with you, I'm using them. When I use them, it's usually sub-maximal and it's for a warm-up before they go throw, right? And we've all been working with baseball players for a long time, obviously, right? We know a lot of guys, they struggle their first 5 and 10 throws, right? They can't throw a little bit, or it's a little cranky, it's got to warm up a little bit. You do 10 throws, rocker position with even like a 9-ounce ball, maybe a 1-pound ball, but it's sub-max. That's the key. You're going to get that layback a little bit, and it's going to be easier. You're going to have a more productive throwing session out of there, and I think that's going to be what's beneficial for you. So that's how we do it. Do we have guys that come to us and say, hey, I want to push the envelope? Well, if you've met all your buckets, then okay, I'll help you push the envelope. And we see some small upticks in some people, but man, this is hard to control. All those success stories that you hear about, they're doing like 20 different things. And weighted balls is just a very small part of that, right? And that's a compliment. That's a compliment to some of the programs that are out there because they're not just weighted ball programs. They do a lot of great things for these people. It's really hard to say it's the weighted balls that are helping all the time. So I think that was a long way of avoiding your question, John. No, hopefully I answered it a little bit.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And Mike, Cody Hart's at Ball State University.
Hey, Cody.
When do you feel comfortable for a guy to start to progress back into weighted balls after an injury?
I would say it depends on the injury, and I would also depend on what you're doing. Honestly, I think if you're doing weighted balls like for velocity, so like maximal effort weighted balls and not just for like a warm-up prior or something like that, if you're doing that in season, I think you're doing it wrong just to start. And I know a lot of programs are. But man, if it is like mid-May and you're focused on velocity development, man, I think you're just taking gas out of the tank. Those are the guys that are going to start to scuffle a little bit, if you ask me. Like if you don't have good velocity prior to the season, it's too late, dude. So I would say that's the one thing for me. Now so that's how do you get back to a program if somebody's got like a short term, like a 3-week shutdown or something like that mid-season. I would say I don't do them in season. If they got injured and they had to shut down in season, chances are they're weak, they're tight, something like that, and there's no way you fix that in 3 weeks. You got them over the hump, right? But if you get them back there and you don't make an adjustment to their workload, which in weight ball is the first thing I pull off the table with workload, you're getting paid, or not really in college, maybe sometimes, but you're getting paid to pitch every 5th or 7th day, whatever it is in college, right? You're getting paid to go out there and pitch. right? Not to throw weighted balls on day 3, right? So that's the first thing we pull away when we do workload management with in-season stuff and then get back to it. So I like how you're shaking your head. Now let's talk long-term like Tommy John. I don't see a place for these in Tommy John. Now, I just remember that the weighted balls manipulate stress, right? So they are equal to or more stressful than a 5-ounce ball in a majority of these positions. So now I don't really care if you use those balls, but when I develop my interval throwing programs to get people back to play, I am slowly increasing the dose in the stress over time, right? So it doesn't really matter what ball you use, but you have to be really incremental with it, right? And I do that, and I have the whole thing scripted out workload management wise with a 5-ounce ball. The guys that want to get back into those weighted balls in the middle of that, they end up spiking a little bit because the workload goes too high, and then I can't control it as much, right? So if a guy's adamant, like, hey, man, I'm a weighted ball guy, I need to do it, we say, like, well, great. Once you get healthy and you're back and you're off the interval throwing program, we can talk about getting back into it. But the interval throwing program is like a dosage. It's a medication to me, right? And it's a prescribed dosage, right? If you are manipulating intensity and weight of the ball, you're going to ruin my equation. Is that enough, Cody? Anything else specifically? That's good. All right, perfect. Good. Thanks, Cody.
Mike, just to kind of add along that, what are your thoughts, and to kind of piggyback on Cody's statement is, if you're utilizing it in a rehab progress, we look at the research and showing that it decreases elbow stress, but increases overall stress, right? So the idea of potentially using it for a guy that hasn't thrown for a long time versus a guy that has, and I don't think that that's been, pigeonholed in some of these studies. I mean, there's going to be a huge difference if you're taking a guy from riding the couch for 5 weeks into a weighted ball program versus a guy who's been throwing for the last X amount of months. So would you see any benefit in maybe taking some stress off of the elbow for a guy who is coming off of an elbow injury if that's the goal in the beginning of a throwing program?
No, let me do this. I'm going to show you this. It's not what you think. This is the problem with mechanics. I hid this slide just because I had a lot of information, but this is the slide. Can you guys see that? You guys can see that, right? All right, so this is the stress with a weighted ball program. It's not what you think. So with a 5-ounce ball, that's this silver line over here. This is valgus stress, or the torque over time during a pitch. So you have like that little bump up, max external rotation, then it comes back down. When you throw an underweight ball, like a 4-ounce ball, that has a huge peak spike and then goes up, right? And anybody that has tried to throw a wiffle ball as hard as they can knows how uncomfortable that is, right? That is what you're feeling when you throw an underload ball as hard as you can. You have this really big spike in stress that happens really fast. So that acute spike is pretty stressful right there. But here's what happens with the overload ball. So if you look at a 7-ounce ball for this example, what happens is the peak stress is less than silver, but over the duration of the throw, it's probably cumulatively higher. And that's probably why we're seeing an increase in layback, right? I think I took these slides out too, but I was talking to a lot of people about like, why does this happen, right? Well, like, trust me, at first I thought like, well, just lats, teres, and subscaps were tearing, anterior capsules are tearing. And trust me, they are. That is part of this cumulatively a little bit. But there's a neurophysiological response here. We're desensitizing a GTO, and we're doing that with the stress. So this is the number one reason, going back to this slide, where we don't want to make any of our assumptions with coming back from injuries and stuff based on peak stress. That's not the value that we want to do. And I get it. That's tricky. And I think a lot of people are saying that, like, wow, weighted balls are less stressful. I don't think they're necessarily less stressful. And I think you could argue that if you use a weighted ball, even if it's less stressful, but you gain ER, that's going to increase stress when you get to throwing again. What's up, Daniel?
What up?
How's it going?
Good. Can you see me?
Nope. I can hear you, though. You got a question?
I don't. I apologize.
You just jumped up on my screen. I don't know why, Jason. Sorry. Daniel's like, uh-oh.
You're good.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So with the results that you guys found from the weighted ball program and an increase in external rotation, did that change your like arm care, strength protocol, or anything like that?
Yeah, awesome question, Annie. I like it. Annie, where are you? What school?
I'm actually a graduate assistant at South Mountain Community College.
Nice, sweet. Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So yeah, so what we do with players and what we're doing now at the pro level, because they often go away, right? So we don't see them in the winter, and most of them go train elsewhere. When we do our pre-participation physicals for guys, they come in and we go through our physical exam stuff. We try to identify guys that have total rotational windows that have opened too much and that have gained too much external rotation, and we'll see that. I can tell you exactly which guys did weighted balls in the winter and which guys didn't. Right. So when you measure it up, let's make up a number and say you're 180 degrees ER plus IR on the non-dominant side, and then you're 200 degrees on the throwing side. That alone is bad, just that in and of itself. But then what we end up finding is that 20 degrees extra that came from external rotation. So the first thing we do is we sit them down. We have a little coming to Jesus talk with them about this. We kind of show them the science and we talk about this. And you know what most players say, to be honest with you? I know you guys are in a jam in college and sometimes your coaches make you guys do these things. But most players look at us in the face and say, I had no idea. I'll stop. Right. And trust me, as a training staff, we have like a meeting in the morning, especially in spring training. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. We're meeting. It was like 10 of us. We're all sitting on our whiteboard. We're like, what are we going to say to this guy? Like, we're gonna talk to him about like something bad, like how's this gonna go, like we're all nervous about it, and then we get to the player and the player's like, oh man, geez, now that you explain that to me, yeah, I'll stop doing that, no worries. So what we do is we take it back, and what we do show is that external rotation does start to creep back a little bit, but don't get me wrong, there's a point of no return. There is a point of no return where it's hard to come back from. So my example of the 20 degrees, that's probably the guy that's in trouble. But we've had guys that are 5-10 degrees too much, and we just say, like, hey, let's pump the brakes on some of the throwing, cut back a little long toss, cut back the weighted balls, and then that ER window goes back down, strength comes back up, and then they get back into throwing. We say less is more. And then we always ask them, hey, how are you feeling now? They're saying 10 times better, right? So you got to get an influencer, unless your coach is shoving it down their throat, but you got to get an influencer on the team for that to happen to, for them to then be like your advocate for the other guys. Like, hey guys, like, Annie told me to slow down a little bit, and man, my shoulder strength just jumped off the charts the last few weeks, and man, I feel like I got life again on my ball. We see it all the time, Annie, all the time. It's crazy.
So does that kind of set back your strength training and arm care? Like, so when they come in with that 20-degree difference, does it kind of seem as if you're taking 2 steps back in order to get them to where they want to be?
Yeah, no, we don't change strength or arm care stuff at all. In fact, we probably bump it up. We take away like a lot of like the soft tissue to try to gain motion, obviously, because they don't need to gain motion. But no, strength and arm care continue. To be honest with you, they need more arm care, because the more loose you are, the more total rotational motion you have, the more hypermobility you have. Like if you do Biden scales and stuff like that, then the more that the strength over time that you have will help dynamically stabilize. They always feel better. Good question.
Awesome, thank you.
A lot of guys with the weighted balls, they come in tired, right? So again, it inhibits strength gains probably, and anecdotally we see that too, and it loosens them up. So now you have a weak person with a loose shoulder. It's a tough combo. So, and guys, I know I'm sounding like super pessimistic here. Like you guys may have had some success stories. I'm not saying there isn't success or these are bad. I just want you to see some of the reality behind the science behind it, so that way you guys can factor this in a little bit. Thanks, Annie.
No problem. Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, Mike, and this isn't really research based, it's more of just your personal thoughts, but you said obviously strength doesn't increase. And from a strength and conditioning perspective, you would assume that you're overloading particular structures by increasing weight. And if you were to do it for longer than 6 weeks, you're breaking past that CNS adaptation phase into a strength gaining phase. So why do you think that is, that it's not doing it? Is it more of a biomechanical issue or what have you?
Yeah, I think you just nailed it. There's a big difference between weight training, strength training, like doing deadlifts in a controlled fashion in normal range of motion, progressively loading it. And we're talking about putting stress on a ligament, first off, let alone soft tissue like muscle wise, but a ligament. But what we're doing is with high speed, high force at end range of motion, right? So this is not the same. And then the next thing people tend to say is like, well, what about adaptations like Wolff's Law with bone? Well, first off, ligaments don't adapt like bones. That's the first thing. And if you actually look at studies, there's a study that was just published, there's a couple studies that just published that look at the UCL over the course of a baseball season, and it actually starts to show that it gets larger, right? So a lot of people are like, yay, the UCL gets larger over the course of the season, but it gets more damaged intra-substance almost, like where the ligament's not as good. So yes, it gets engulfed, but probably in a bad way because it's trying to get stronger. But then when you take time off over the winter, it comes back down to normal. So to answer the question a little bit, like, well, is some of this good so that way they adapt and then they're stronger to do it? I don't think so. First off, I don't think ligaments adapt that way. Like this is a ligament. That's like saying like, man, if you don't want to sprain your ankle, you should just keep spraining it, and then it'll get stronger. And I think as every athletic trainer in the world knows, the more you sprain your ankle, the looser your ankle joint, right? So ligaments respond a little bit differently. I think that's a big part of it. But I don't think that any of these gains that we're having are strength based. It's a neuromuscular adaptation by desensitizing the GTO, but also increasing range of motion. And then it's a physics equation. If I'm going to accelerate from here going forward versus a lesser range of motion, I'm going to have less velocity. So the more laid back you get, the better. But Jason, that's a great question because a lot of people are trying to draw similar conclusions based on like what we know in other fields like strength and conditioning. And I just think there's differences between throwing and strength training for that example.
Mike, Chris from Dallas Baptist.
Hey,
Sounds
Chris.
like, how you doing? It sounds like submaximal is definitely the key if you're going to use it along with maturity. But I've got questions that are a little bit off of that. With long toss, do you feel like that could be just as much stress as a weighted ball program and flat grounds? Because that's something that I'm trying to eliminate at DBU is more flat grounds, less flat ground stuff.
Yeah.
So thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
I love it. And those are actually some really good topics with that. So what was the first part of your question again? The second half was the long toss and stuff. The partial effort stuff.
Yep.
So we're about to, we started a study, but it just got into the COVID season with baseball. So we're probably not going to have this for a couple of years. My next hypothesis with all this, based on what we just showed with those two studies, is that you don't need to do a weighted ball program all winter. That if you just did a sub-maximal warm-up and you just gained a little bit of layback, you're going to have more velocity that day. So that's like my next hypothesis that we're working on. So we started a study with ASMI in the lab down in Birmingham, where we're going to have some players come in, throw a pen, and then some players come in and do a weighted ball warm-up and then throw a pen and see if there's a difference. That's my hypothesis. I know for sure anecdotally guys feel better when they do that. I don't know if it's going to relate to velo or not, but that's kind of my hypothesis. And if we're right, that's going to blow weighted ball programs out of the water. If you ask me, no reason to do it all winter if you don't need to, right? So I'm a big fan of the sub-maximal because I think it works a little bit. And I'm also a big fan of assessing and monitoring, right? So if you're going to start a weight ball program and your coaching staff is adamant that you need to do it, you guys as the athletic training staff, you got to be measuring them, monitoring them, watching guys' adaptations change from these programs so we can individualize them. I think that's huge. Now to go back to your long toss question, here's what we know about long toss. Essentially, when you get to about 120, give or take, the stress is similar to the mount. And then what happens over time, the further you go, you get more and more stressful, right? The one thing we know for certain is that a max effort long, like as far as you can, just one of those like rawr, like your head's way over here, your release point's crazy. When you throw as far as you can, the stress on your elbow goes up 10%. That's too much. So that's the first thing we take away from science is like, look, max effort long toss is too aggressive on the body. We don't necessarily need that. But here's what I want you to keep in mind. There's nothing wrong with long toss, but for every throw at 150 that you make, it's equal to a pitch in terms of the stress. Remember, your UCL does not care if you're pitching, throwing long toss, throwing a rock at your little sister, right? Like it does not care what you're doing. It just monitors stress. So you got to put all of those into the equation when you're developing your programs. So you can't take away pitching and say, I'm going to take stress off them, but we're going to long toss, because it doesn't really like work that way, if that kind of makes sense. And then what was the last part of your question? You had one more thing, right? Sorry.
Grounds, the stress and flat ground.
Flat grounds. I think, so this is a bold statement, I think we are officially at the point where scientifically we can say flat grounds don't make sense. And I will say, not to give away proprietary stuff, but with the White Sox, I think we've officially kind of eliminated it. We got away from them a lot this spring, and trust me, it took a 5-minute conversation with our pitching coordinator and our pitching coach. I'm talking about like a big league pitching coach who's been doing this for 40 years, one of the best in the game. And in 5 minutes, I just told him what we learned about flat ground. He's like, "Yeah, let's get rid of it then." And it totally makes sense. So here's what we know about flat ground: stress on the body is probably the same as the mound. So it's not. There's no point on doing it if it's not less stressful, right? That's why we originally did it, is we thought it was less stressful. It's probably the same, but your mechanics are completely different because you don't have the bump and you're not throwing downhill. So your release point's higher, right? So it's actually probably bad for your mechanics, right? Your velocity is lower, which shows you that your kinematic flow of your body isn't there to produce that force. So you're getting the same amount, you're getting less velocity with the same amount of torque with probably poor biomechanics. It's like negative, negative, negative. There's really probably no benefit. The only thing weirder, ready? The catcher up. No idea why anybody ever does that, right? We've all done it. We've all been guilty of having the catcher up, right? The ball doesn't care. Like, the ball's not going 5 feet less, right? It's exploding into his mitt faster. You're giving your catcher one of the best reaction drills in the world, right? By having him do a short pen, right? So, these are some of the things that I think science is changing. And, I don't know how it happens at the college level. I think you guys get a little different dynamic, but 5-minute conversation with our crew with the White Sox, and everybody was on board on like trying to do what's right based on the science. So hopefully that helps, Chris.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That
Yes,
really
sir.
does.
Yes, sir. Good luck.
Mike, this is Joel Longmont with Indiana University. I just got a quick question. You keep going to references with measuring total arc and that kind of thing. My question is how often are you measuring total arc? First part of the fall, end of the fall, first part after the winter break. About how many times a year are you doing that? That's one thing that we're kind of in discrepancy with the different pitching coaches of when these different assessments should take place.
Yeah, so at the college level with me at Northeastern, so we do it right at the beginning of fall, right? I want to see like what spring, summer, how their bodies, where are they at in the fall? And believe it or not, we put that into our equation of what's going to happen with the players. So one of the things we do it well at Northeastern, Coach Glavin is a stud, right? With and that's why I work with Northeastern is he wants to work with me as much as I want to work with him. He wants to learn and do things the right way. We have like multiple buckets for the players. Like, some players just need to get ready for the spring, right? Some players need to gain velocity, yes. Some players need to learn like a new pitch or something like that. And they all have different plans in the fall and the winter based on that. I know that's not rocket science, but believe it or not, that doesn't happen at every school. So fall is important for us because we may have a plan going into the fall, but then we may have a kid that needs some innings, but then he looks terrible on exam. He looks like he's gassed. So he's the kid that pitched until mid-August, right? And then took a week off and started long tossing, right? Because he's got to let it breathe, right? So we see these things that these guys like kind of do. So we make that adjustment based on that. So that's the big one for me. I think when you get to in season, then what we tend to do is we probably try to get like once a month in season, so we can kind of just monitor trends. At the big league level, we don't even do it once a month. We do it kind of like, pre-spring training, and then we probably do it like 2-3 times in the summer and the end of the year, just to watch those trends, right? And I've seen that all here. If you do nothing to the players, they're going to lose internal rotation. But if you do some arm care and you maintain them, they don't lose internal rotation. But they do gain external rotation over the course of the season. So it's normal for a pitcher to gain a little bit of external rotation over the course of the season. But the difference is you can do that like that with a weighted ball. I'd rather have it take 150 innings than do it in 5 minutes with a weighted ball.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Hey, Mike. Mark Dominic from UNCW. I got a question about when you're dealing with a patient or client who's been on a weighted ball program already, what are like some red flags maybe you look to when you need to cut it out? You've worked with them, maybe they have a little bit of flare up in the shoulder or whatever it is. You work on some core stability, some dynamic stability of the shoulder, et cetera. At what point do you decide, we need to cut out your weighted ball and change that?
There's a few metrics. You nailed it with the first one. They hurt their shoulder. So, and again, it's not the weighted ball that hurt their shoulder, right? A 5-ounce ball hurts the shoulder too. That's the first thing we teach all our guys. Throwing a baseball, bad for you, right? Like, well, just get over that like concept, right? And then we know that. But if you're doing things like weighted balls, you may be doing a little bit more. So if you got hurt, that's number one, that you've spiked your workload somehow, right? And weighted balls make it really hard to manipulate that workload and to maintain it. So that I would take it away from that alone. But the things we monitor, even in an asymptomatic person, probably number one is external rotation, just based on the results of our study. So we get those baseline measurements, but then we're looking at that total arc and we're seeing like, oh wow, that guy was 180 in fall, and then after the winter doing all these programs, he's getting into his pens like, you know, mid-December, early January, and like, wow, he's 195. That we would probably say like, hey, you know, hey Mark, congrats, it worked. Calm down and let's pitch now, right? like let's calm down, and then we'll monitor and see how that kind of goes. So external rotation is the big one that we kind of look from there. But then the other one is, you know, does their shoulder strength tank? But I think you're probably going to see the other two as well, and the shoulder strength will just be part of that.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir. Good questions, everybody. This has been good.
Hey, Mike. It's Allison Souza. I'm at University of Minnesota Duluth. I have a question about going back to the submax concept. I have some guys that use weighted balls to warm up every day, and you know, looking at the research, couldn't really find a lot, obviously. What are your thoughts about that, and kind of how do you monitor the workload there?
Let me see if I can pull this up. You guys can't see my screen, right? I'm not ready to show it to you yet. I want to show it. I take the name off it. I want to show you this. Oh man, I didn't blur out any names. Hold on one second. I'll show you this. Let me show you this real quick. You take a screenshot and slide it over. This is stress per throw. Check this out. I should have put these in the slides for you guys. So make a screenshot of it and drag it over there to show you guys. So, all right, you see that? You guys see that?
No, we're still looking at your stress time curve.
Oh, you're looking at PowerPoint. Right. Let me do this. I'm gonna have to get fancy here. I'm gonna make a new slide. Look how fancy we are. All for you, Allison. I'm gonna do this. All right, check this out. Luckily, I'm good with my Mac, right? We can do things fast. All right, so check this out. This is stress. This is throws. This is a normal person's, just a normal long toss day in spring training. And this is stress on the elbow per throw. So that's the first throw, and that's the 90th throw, right? This is clearly in there, right? But what happens over time? This is somebody that's like, okay, fifth throw, that's like them playing like light catch, 45 feet, 60 feet, 75 feet, 90 feet, 120, right? And then they stretch it out and they long toss. Remember I said earlier, I answered that other guy's question and said, once you get to like 120 or so, the torque's pretty much the same as pitching. You can kind of see it totally flattens out. So what they did was they took about 40 throws to get to their max effort long toss, and then they then sat there for another 50 throws. So their workload is like 50 max effort throws right here, right? And it took them about 40 throws to ramp up for that. I'm going to show you what a weighted ball program looks like. Okay, this is not good.
Mike, while you're doing that, can I ask how you're measuring that stress? Is that Modus or?
Yeah, that is with the Modus sleeve that we have. So we're pretty good. We use a lot of the Modus sleeve. So I actually was super lucky. So Ben Hansen is the founder of Modus, kind of the biomechanist and the guy that created Modus. But they recently sold, and I was lucky enough to steal Ben. So Ben now works for us at the White Sox, which is awesome for us. So here is a weighted ball program. So a couple things I want you to keep in mind when we look at this here. Okay, so again, same thing, number throws on the bottom. So at this one, we have a total of like 105. I don't know what those last few are. That's probably him being mad at himself and like throwing a rock at the fence because his bullpen was terrible, right? But if he had 105 total throws, here's what happened. First 5 throws, I don't even know what these were. These first throw here were in the training room with a weighted ball against the wall. Probably all seen that happen, right? Then he went outside, 45, 60, 75 feet, 90 feet, whatever. Then boom, 150, pull downs, throwing as hard as he can. Then kind of take a little break, throws a little bit, and boom, comes back here, gets ready for his bullpen. This yellow is ball velocity. That's Rapsodo data. So we know that from here to here is his bullpen, right? So this is weighted balls in the training room. This is playing catch. This is long toss and pull downs. This is just prior to him throwing his pen and then going down. So he sat down for a little bit and kept loose. So in spring training, like there's a lot of pitchers, right? So he was in the second group of pitchers. So one group was probably throwing their pen. He warmed up. They were throwing their pen. He was waiting. And then his turn was second to throw a pen. This is what all that means. But I want to point out a couple things. This is his bullpen. This is a max effort bullpen right here. Okay. That's max effort bullpen. His warm up prior to the bullpen, his long toss and pull downs, and his weighted balls on the 5th to 10th throw of the day in the training room were more stressful than his bullpen. You guys see that? So he spikes the stress, comes down, spikes the stress, comes down, spikes the stress, and throws his bullpen. So he was a reliever, right? So I asked him this question. I said, hey, let me ask you a question. When you have to get hot fast in a game, you know, it's the big leagues, right? You got to get hot fast. You get a phone call and you only get like 5 throws to get loose, and you got to throw as hard as you can those first 5 throws and get in the game. How does your outing usually go? How do you feel? Well, not good. It's too much of a rush. I feel like it's like a shock to my shoulder. Like, okay, that's exactly what you do every day in the training room with your weighted balls. On your 5th throw, your 10th throw, you are spiking your workloads in the training room before you even leave. More stressful than a pitch off the mound. Okay. Then the next question I ask, I go, all right, let me ask you a question. When you get called in the bullpen, you get dry hump 3 times before you get in the game. You got to get hot 3 times and you sit back down and get hot 3 more times and you can get back in the game. How's your outing usually go? It's like, well, usually not that good. You know, it's usually pretty, you know, I'm not as sharp. I'm like, well, great. You just dry humped yourself 3 times before you threw a pen in front of every front office member and coach in the organization. Now, I didn't say that part. I'm being a little bit more blunt with you guys, right? I had a nice conversation with the guy. He's a good guy, right? But again, you know what he said? I had no idea. He didn't say like, oh, I need to do this. He said, I had no idea. That's just what people taught me to do that they said was right. I go, you need to look like this. This is what you need to look like to gradually warm up, take stress off your body, and then throw as hard as you can. This is not a good throwing program. That's stressful on the body. That's like, you know, go, go, go. If you're training to, you know, if you're a soccer player, right, and you're like, all right, I'm going to do an injury prevention program for my soccer game. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get out of bed. I'm going to do 10 sprints. No warm up, nothing. 10 sprints. Good. Then I'm going to sit down. I'm going to get hot. I'm going to get cold. I mean, so then I'm going to do 10 sprints again. And then I'm going to get cold. Then I'm going to do 10 sprints again, right? That's the recipe of getting a hamstring strain, right? That's how things tend to work. So that's the difference. This is what we like to see with a nice warm up with somebody. And this is what we see with people that tend to use weighted balls and pull downs before they get into there. So lots of information to digest right there for you guys, but this is the sort of information that until you could graphically see this, like we didn't know these answers. I didn't know these answers, right? Like I didn't know it was this bad, but once you see this, you're like, oh crap. Like that's not what you want. Like it goes back to my this slide, right? You know, you're like, ooh, like that's not what I was expecting. So hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully too, like I hope you guys see here too. Like I'm not one to just like, you know, say things. I'm trying to show you a little bit some of the data from a science standpoint that we're doing right here, and I think that's pretty interesting. Let's see. What do you think? Maybe one more, Jason?
Oh, we can fire away. I'm eating it up. I don't see any problems with going over time.
Anybody else got a question?
Mike, I'll shoot. Josh Ogden from Baylor. Do you see any place in whether it's a rehab process, like towards the end after you started a mound progression, or even just in your general population of from like a dynamic systems perspective, throwing a 4, 5, and 6 ounce ball to a target, working on accuracy, not necessarily velocity?
I think you could argue that specificity of training is going to probably take over right there. If you trained with a 4 ounce ball on command and then pitched in a game with 5 ounce ball, I don't think it's going to go well. These are good theories. These are textbook based theories, right? That people are trying to apply to baseball to be creative to train things right now. I will say this: our current generation of baseball players do not have good command. Right. So whatever we're doing now is not really going well, right? Where we are sacrificing command for velocity. So I will say I know what you're citing as a potential benefit, but it doesn't seem to make complete sense to me. I'm going to go back to the specificity of training and the mechanics and say that if you want to throw with more accuracy, you have to throw with more 5-ounce balls and less of the other ones. I think those other things are completely based on theory, but I don't know any science either way. So I wouldn't say I'm against it, but I think inherently I don't think my brain jives with that as being how I would work on command. Have you had success with it? I'm kind of curious because I'm open to learning.
Well, I've tried it in 2 different thoracic outlet rehab protocols. In one case, just before I started the 4, 5, and 6 ounce thrown to a target progression, he got drafted and signed. And in the second case, we had COVID. So,
So you haven't even done it yet. I'm going to say right there, are these surgical thoracic outlets or non-surgical?
Both surgical.
Okay, both surgical. So that may the reason why these guys had command issues was because of thoracic outlet. So
right, and that's the working theory in my mind was, the big knock on first rib resection is, well, these guys lack command. They can't throw strikes for 2 years when they come back. So thinking like from the dynamic systems approach, if we can kind of jumpstart that process of being able to throw strikes to a target with just slightly variable weights, maybe we can, instead of an 18-month to 24-month period before they can really locate, maybe we can get that in 8 to 12, 6 to 8.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. Like I think we can have the same conversation about like blocked and random practice right now and concepts with motor learning with those things here. Like I think think of it this way: if you're learning a new pitch, you go random, training. I don't think it's going to go very well. I think you have to go block for a while and then go random. Right. So like just as an example right here, I think what you're citing dynamic system, it's a theory. And it's a theory. And I think before we start working on theories, I think the huge low hanging fruit right there is that this guy has thoracic outlet. Probably has thoracic outlet syndrome because he's doing velocity program. And that's probably why he has no command. So take that rib out, and I don't even know if you have to do anything like that. Just get rid of the rib, and hopefully he can feel his fingers again, and then his command comes back up. I think that's, we got like 2 different like equations with that, right? So I don't know. I know the theory. I'm not against it. I would say there's nothing negative with doing it. I would just say just try it. But I think with thoracic outlet, I don't even think you need to get that fancy. You already did your work, hopefully.
Yeah, and we've had good outcomes, but like I said, it's the control piece that I'm trying to work on a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, it's just a theory, but in both of the programs where I wrote that out for the guys, just before I was going to be able to start that part of the progression, one guy gets drafted in the 5th or 6th round or whatever and takes the money, and the other one, we all get sent home. So,
well, the good part of what you're proposing, I don't think there's a negative of doing it. So I think you should try. And I completely look forward for you to email me or find me on Twitter or something in 2 years and let me know your progress, because I want to learn from that. If you find success with it, I think that's pretty good. But yeah, thoracic outlet's like a whole nother topic. We could have talked about that, Jason. But just talking about TOS and stuff like that. Like, not everybody comes back from TOS. It's not like ACL in your knee where like I'm skiing and then pop, the thing's torn, and then let me just put it back and then it's good to go. Like thoracic outlet, it's like a bomb went off in your neck of scar tissue, and the surgeon has to go in there. And if they do too much, they can do damage to the nerves. And the doctors want to do as little as possible. So with ACL, you kind of go from like 100% and then pop, and then boom, you're down to 60%, and then you have surgery, it goes back to 100. TOS, like you're slowly like clogging your vessels. You get down to 60%. You have surgery, and you try to get like 80, 90, 95%. It's not always 100. That's why the outcomes are so variable with TOS. Believe it or not, the reason why I learned that, by the way, is by screwing up, right? Just like all of us, we make mistakes. We've had some guys had revisions and then all of a sudden make dramatic improvements. And we're like, oh crap, they didn't take out enough rib the first time, or the scalene just scarred up a good amount. And what they're doing now is they're putting some sheaths around the nerves now. I think that might block some scar tissue. So we're going to see some progress in that down the road. And then we won't even have to worry about command, because getting back on a weighted ball program, get them going.
Well, actually, the 2 guys I'm referencing, they both had the sheath put around the nerve.
Oh, nice.
So
good.
that would have been part of it also.
You're good, dude. I think it's gonna be. I think they're gonna do fine. So yeah, but to answer your question, I don't know. I think I'm gonna go back to keep it simple, stupid. The KISS concept, and just say if I'm working on command, I want to do 5 ounce with block practice until we start seeing improvements. Before I start going dynamic systems, I start going randomized practice and stuff like that. I want to see them make those adjustments, and then yes, randomize and dynamic systems for somebody that's accurate that wants to become Greg Maddox accurate. That would be my advice, but I could be wrong.
All right, appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. I expect a message from you in 2 years. I want to hear your progress.
So, Mike, you said you wanted to know progress on that, and I'll say from experience that I've used both, not with TOS, but with other types of injuries or guys that I didn't necessarily want to fully shut down at the time, and they were able to do everything that they needed to do with a little bit of a heavier ball, nothing absolutely insane. I think the benefit there is that you find guys don't want to throw maximally with a heavier ball when they're actually playing catch versus doing plyo tosses into a wall. And I find that a lot of guys enjoy it, one, but two, I have the benefit of having a Motus sleeve while doing it, so I could sit there and track live while doing these things.
That's great.
But again, slippery slope, and I would say that I did it the same weight with all of the throws. The only time we did ever make a switch, to Josh's credit, I saw some, the best freaking NFL touchdown spikes you've ever seen in your life, because none of these guys had any idea where it was going. And then kind of in relation to go back and put that more towards the 5 ounce and dealing with some injuries over the course of this last year and just figuring out throwing programs or, changing it up a little bit from the interval throwing program. There's some pretty good pitching coaches out there that can kind of help us along the way, in my opinion, if you don't necessarily know your salt in those areas. But one, particularly SEC, Fred Coral, gave me some phenomenal advice about trying to just periodize guys in a way that I didn't think about before, that made a huge difference with just utilizing a 5 ounce ball and working with exertion specifically.
I think that's phenomenal. And I will say that another way I use weighted balls, which is kind of interesting, that guy that struggles to start playing early catch at 45 feet, right? And they're just like pushing, throwing darts. You give them a 6 or 7 ounce ball and you just play light catch at 45 feet. It comes out so much more natural. It just feels better. That I agree. That's what I do it with. But you see again here, we're not talking about like max effort stuff, like 3 times a week, all freaking winter. Like weighted balls are a tool that we can use. It's just about, how we use them, I think. Sneak peek for the people, what's it been, almost an hour and a half. So anyone that stayed on, I don't know if you can see the attrition rate with this, Jason, but for anyone stayed on, sneak peek, we're actually, I have a new version of interval throw program that we're going to publish. So it's funny, I published the one in JOSPT almost 20 years ago. And it's the classic Andrews one that everybody does, like post-op, right? Or everybody's supposed to do post-op, right? Well, don't tell anyone that I haven't used it in like 15 years, even though we published it back then. It's not the best. It's a vanilla program, right? If you're in the middle of like Idaho and you've never done a Tommy John rehab before and you're working on a player and you follow that, it's going to go well. But it's not like the best. So we have a completely modernized one that we've validated with chronic workload buildups and acute chronic workload ratios that build up over the course of the Tommy John. So I'm working with Ben Hansen with Modus and the White Sox now to do that. And we are including Dr. Andrews and Kevin Wilk to kind of, again, say like, hey, this is going to be going forward. This is the new interval throwing program. So that's coming out really soon. And it's based on stuff like this that you guys are seeing that we kind of showed. So I don't know, maybe in about a year or so, by the time it gets published and stuff, it's hard to get things published nowadays, but hopefully we'll see that. And it's going to be everything I've kind of alluded to and talked about, like about periodizing this and developing workload progressions, and it's a dosage and everything counts. It's all built into that program. It's pretty neat. So you guys get to hear about it first for like the 3 people that stayed on for the whole hour and a half, right, Jason?
Hey, we only lost like 12 there. We're doing pretty good.
It's pretty good. They're dead to me, those 12 though. I don't want to talk to them.
Well, that being said, anybody else have any more questions for Mike?
Yeah, I've got one. Andy Hoppenjohn, Troy University. Forgive me if you've already touched on this. I had to step away a time or two. But at what point post-surgery, whether it's Tommy John or shoulder, labrum, reconstruction, would you say it's okay to resume a throwing or a weighted ball program, not during the throwing program, but, after their return to play? Or would you do it at all, given their history?
Yeah, we did. We talked about that a little bit. Now so I actually we use weighted balls as part of the plyo program. I'm going to say that that's not what we're talking about. Like doing like a 2-pound plyo, like as a drill pre-throw is not what we're talking. You're saying like, when do they resume their thing that they did for a weighted ball program? We did answer this a little bit. I don't think there's a place for it in the rehab process. I don't think it's needed. My throwing program, and again, kind of just alluded to it, but is like very scripted and very dose dependent. With chronic workload builds up, acute chronic ratio, something like that. If we start throwing weighted balls in there, we're going to ramp up way too fast too soon. I don't think there's a place for it. Remember, they're just a tool. They're not magical. You don't need them to throw. We survived like over 100 years in baseball without weighted balls. Like they're not magical, right? So I don't think there's a place for them. I think you could argue the fact that they used them is probably why they had that surgery, right? So we got to be careful with reintroducing them. What we tend to say is, look, let's get through this throwing program. This interval throwing program, it's not a baseball program. It's a scripted medicine dosage, right? I mean, increasing the dosage of your medicine each time you throw. Once you get through with that, like, look, you're a grown man, you're a professional, you're your own boss. If you want to get back into that stuff, absolutely, go nuts. It's your career. But it's not part of the rehab process. I own you for these 12 months. Oh, Troy, by the way. My man, my man, Dave Bush.
Yeah, he's my supervisor, actually, the ATI employee contracted to Troy.
You got to tell Dave I said hi. He and I worked together for a while. We're partners.
Definitely will. Appreciate it.
That's funny. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks, Jason, for hosting this and organizing all this and doing the best we can to help you guys. I hope everybody's staying safe and washing your hands.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it, Mike. Obviously, if you want to stay on for the little discussion afterwards, feel free. But my plan going forward, that of course, if nobody has any more questions. All right. So I put together just a little poll, basically, to kind of see where we're at in regards to just the people that are in this meeting. And I probably should have pulled this up a little earlier, but just the ability to see where everybody's at in regards to using these, not using these in their programs, whether it be you, whether it be your coaches, kind of go from there. So I just think it would be interesting to see, so we're all on the same page. And if you give me a second here so I can upload this, if it wants to let me.
Off topic, mustache is looking phenomenal.
It is not letting me add this poll. Well, that's fun. So that option's not going to work. So what I am going to do instead, real quick, for everybody that is over the CBATS Google group, is kind of send it over there, and then I can manage the questions as they come in. So for those of you that are still on, if you want to hop on your email right quick, and I will send you the link to a Google poll. And the wonderful part about Google is it automatically generates that info for me. Oh. course, as soon as I do that, it actually opens up and allows me to upload it. Maybe it was the amount of people in here. All right, so we'll make it to where you guys don't have to hop on your emails. If you want to just hop on the one that I just put inside of the chat there, you guys can go ahead and answer questions, and we'll kind of go over what we're looking at. Got about 16 people still jumping at the poll there. All right, about 4 left. Obviously, this kind of encompasses some of our other topics at this point too, which I think is neat to talk about. Once we get these last 3, I can actually post these results so everybody can see them. Okay. All right. So looking at the numbers on here, and is this showing for you guys yet or no? Nobody can see these results. All right, well that's fantastic. Oh, there we go. How about now? All right, perfect. So interesting, obviously some people didn't necessarily want to answer, and this I don't think is giving you, hopefully it's giving you guys the percentages too. But obviously the majority of us definitely use weighted balls in some capacity as a program, and then a hell of a lot less that use them inside the rehab setting. I know personally I use them for different, and I worded this a little different over the Google survey versus on here, but I use them a lot for different things like wall dribbles and stuff like that, as opposed to true plyo care drills or throwing. And I think that there's some huge differentiation there in making sure that you do or don't use some of these things. But pretty telling there that a lot of our programs use them, and yet a lot of us don't. Hopping down here to our third question in the line, whether you use it or whether your athletes throw them. And a lot more people throw them. Now, obviously, a little different if you're doing something like a run and gun or actually playing catch with it versus doing plyo care drills, in my opinion, but depends on the athlete. I mean, most of my guys do it sub-max against a wall, and then there's a handful of guys that absolutely let it rip. So like Mike was talking about, different stresses in there. I think one of the cooler things to go back and look at is just the number of programs that are actually utilizing screening. And it's funny to me because I feel like when I started in baseball a handful of years ago, there really wasn't that many people that I could chat to about it. And now there hasn't been a person that's in this group that I haven't really talked to yet that doesn't utilize it, which is pretty fantastic. Anybody have anything that kind of hops out at them in regards to some of these answers?
One thing that jumps out to me, Jason, is just how much collaboration is going on with strength and conditioning, where I feel like a long time ago that wasn't the case at all, especially at some smaller schools, definitely. But I feel like we're definitely collaborating, and strength coach and ourselves and the pitching coach are kind of one entity.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. I mean, when I was at a previous institution, we did FMS across the board, and that was strength and conditioning driven, and sports medicine helped, and we actually even got a PT department in on it as well. And that's kind of where some of my answers in there came from, because I have seen it done a little differently at different institutions, and I think that there's a hell of a lot more benefit to getting other people involved, because it gives you more perspective on, hey, maybe you're not necessarily doing some of the best things out there. I know currently me and my strength and conditioning coach are talking about how to include our wellness questionnaire in regards to performance metrics and my screening, so that we can kind of tie everything together to almost make a profile to give to the coaches of, hey, here's where we both believe that these individuals can improve, and here's the objective data to do so. Interesting, though, that there's not a whole lot of, obviously a few places that utilize outside companies, which I imagine is more of your drive line. I know there's a few other ones. I can't remember. I know UNC Charlotte utilizes a particular company, but the name of the company eludes me. But, collaboration with other ATs is one that I think is a little low on there. And it's awesome to see some numbers, but I think that there's some definite benefit in us talking with some other overhead sports, or ATs from other overhead sports, in regards to, hey, what do you do? Because some of them do and some of them don't. I know I've gotten our volleyball GA to think a little differently and do some stuff, but certainly some interesting perspective there.
Yeah, Jason, I was just going to pop in and say, so I answered for collaboration with outside because we use P3. We started using P3 this year. And I'll tell you, those guys were awesome. As far as collaborating, they wanted to meet with us before we even started doing things. And it was me, our pitching coach, and our strength coach. And so my answer is a little skewed there because, I'm collaborating with everybody. But I think that's the nice part. At least that's the part that my strength coach and I talked about with P3, was they were willing to work with us, and they're not trying to push a product or an idea. They're just like, hey, here are some suggestions, different things that you can think of to get your guys going. So just a little piece there from that particular company.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Is there any other, I know there was two other people that put outside companies. Is there anybody else that's willing to talk about some of the companies that they're utilizing, or that maybe their coaching staff is utilizing?
Same comment as Scott. I didn't realize that was you don't only select one. So I selected collaboration with strength coach and then outside, because like I mentioned on the screening discussion, we do some of the fusionetics. And even though we do that in-house, it's an outside company with the app. So I would have been the second one to answer outside company on that. And like I said, on the screening discussion, we do the screening that I do. And then, if there's movement screening, like actual screening while moving that we want to do, then we go to the Fusionetics app. But collaboration with strength coach, like somebody alluded to just a minute ago, with how much we actually communicate and collaborate now. was talking to one of our administrators a couple of weeks ago, and we had a new strength coach come in just before the semester. And just in conversation, she asked, like, so how much do you and insert strength coach name here actually collaborate and talk? I said, well, before the COVID shutdown, 3 or 4 hours a day. Because baseball, we're in the dugout, and what else are we going to do other than talk and figure out how to make these guys better? This interesting dynamic of our sport that, like, she's an administrator for men's basketball also, and their athletic trainer and strength coach talk 15 minutes a day, and then on game day they show up and do a job. Whereas for us on game day, we show up and stand there and talk in the dugout for 3 or 4 hours. So just interesting dynamic for our sport.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Especially part of earlier in my career, I was an interim guy for basketball for a short period, and the differences there are astronomical. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, that we're not one of the premier money-making sports, and the fact that we have maybe a little more humble brand or less guru-esque brand of S&C coach, but definitely different worlds there. The one thing that I thought was interesting was kind of back and forth across the board as far as, 44% to 28% no performance side of things in regards to screening, which I think is interesting because I really feel like that is something that should almost be added. And my basis there is if anybody has been watching the MLB injury webinars that I've been throwing on the group that now we're invited to, last week, Dr. Camp, who I believe works with the Twins, did a really good presentation in regards to utilizing baseline screening as milestones for return to play in the presence of injury. And I think you look at, and I've been asking a host of people over the last couple of weeks since seeing their first injury webinar about return to play upper extremity battery, just different tests that should be used, why they're being used in regards to deciding, you look at ACL and there's a gluttonous amount of research on the return to play things that you need to hit to make that decision. And there really isn't that many, in my opinion, for upper extremity. And there's a lot of programs out there that are just making decisions willy-nilly. And even in the pro ranks, there's some of these programs that I've reached out to that don't have a very good answer or well thought out answer for some of this stuff. And I think that unfortunately for us, the performance side is part of it, whether it be a loaded carry based off of body weight metrics, a hanging time for a flex pull up or chin up, or a non-flex pull up or chin up, power metrics from a broad jump or single leg broad, or, hands on hips to take out the body sequencing portion of it. I think all those things are pretty valid. It's just whether we're actually willing to take the time to do them or not. Well, if nobody else has anything on the poll.
I think going back to the collaboration with strength coaches, so I'm at Georgia Southern and I've had 3 different strength coaches in 3 years. And I think that's been a really big challenge because the strength coach I had when I first got here, he was very baseball heavy and very baseball oriented. And it was kind of similar to the same relationships you guys talked about where we had hours to come up with plans. And then when we had the turnover start, I had one strength coach who was really into FMS, and we added that in, and that was helpful. But then my current strength coach, he doesn't really collaborate with me. He started doing grip strength testing on our guys, but didn't explain to anybody what he was using it for. And I tried to kind of say, hey, like that'd be good for us when we have wrist injuries. We can see when they get back to baseline. And I'm trying to kind of develop a better screening system for our guys when they get back from this COVID break, and trying to incorporate him with it. I keep hitting a lot of like speed bumps. So I don't know, like if you guys have any advice for how to kind of get over that hurdle when you have those turnovers and have that push back a little bit.
I mean, I don't know if I can speak to that extremely directly, but I've had 3 strength coaches in the last 5 years. And all 3 of them have had, core philosophy of long-term athletic development has been very similar. You don't train a baseball player, you train an athlete. The biggest thing for me has just been availability and willingness to sit there and talk to them and learn about their ideas. So when my first strength coach got here 5 years ago, I try to be a little upfront with some of my ideas, and it's like, hold up. You got to make sure what we're doing is solid. And by the end of that semester, he and I were working hand in hand and sharing ideas and kind of mixed. Like I took some of his philosophy, he took some of mine. Like in terms of our program, every time the team lifts, I'm in the weight room, either observing or there's times we only have one coach for 35 athletes. So I'm a CSCS also. It's not in my job description, but there's times I'll get in and help them coach. Just little things like that to kind of, I guess, build the relationship from my end. Hopefully that helps.
Oh, it does. That's helpful because I've tried to. Our current strength coach, doesn't really have any baseball experience, so I've tried to kind of give him some pointers of, oh, hey, yeah, this is what we're looking at, and even this past semester before everything got shut down, me and the coaches kind of sat down and we're talking about the different mechanics of the different positions and the different players and body types and things like that. So I think there's a big learning curve. And I feel like sometimes I'm more willing to brainstorm and get ideas bouncing around than he is. So I think that's where I find that harder to collaborate.
Yeah. So before the shutdown, how much, and I know with strength conditioning, they pretty much all work other sports, at least on the Olympic side. How much can you actually get him to practice?
He never comes. He came to practice one time and we talked to him about it. We're like, because one of the things in the fall, we were seeing a ton of hamstring and like quad tears, and we're not used to having that. Like we had a lot of quad stuff, and I would go in the weight room. I'm in there, I watch, I kind of see. They send us their workouts, so we know what the people are doing and what they're going through. And we were doing a lot of posterior chain, but not a lot of the other side. So I was like, okay, we're building a lot of the back part, but we're not really doing anything on the front. And he said the position players, their ready position is enough stress on their quads to make up for what they're doing with their hamstrings in the back. And I was just kind of a little mind blown on that. I was like, okay. And then my coaches were like, well, you haven't been out to practice, so how are you supposed to know what their ready position looks like or what groups are running more? Like the outfielders will run for half a practice sometimes. And so he never really made that effort to be out there, but just wanted all of us to just buy into what he was saying when together me and the coaching staff have probably 30 years of baseball where he has 6 months. So I think that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say as much as possible, whether it's you, the head coach, the assistant coaches, just keep inviting him out to practice. And I think the more that they see of that, the more they can appreciate what our guys are actually doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, of the three strength coaches I've worked with, the one in the middle played D3 ball. The other two played college football. And so they didn't really get into baseball until they got into strength and conditioning. And in both cases, they didn't. It kind of started out like, it sounds like your strength coach is in the position of, they were at schools working with other sports and other people left. And so they just got reassigned to baseball. And then same kind of thing, they had to figure it out on the fly, which thank God they've done. They've been great to work with for me. I got them at the second school where they had, at least learned the hard way at some other place. Yeah. But I think the more that you can get them out and see what our athletes do, and I mean, I try and, assuming that y'all structure practice kind of high intensity, low intensity, let them see what a high intensity day looks like. Because like for us, if we're doing cuts and relays, live defense, maybe a couple innings of inter squad, and then batting practice. That's a pretty high intensity practice for us. Whereas other days we're doing position drills. Okay, outfield catching pop ups is not intense, but maybe the infield defense where my head coach is 45 feet down the third baseline hitting incrediballs at him at 90 miles an hour. That's a little more intense. So maybe when they see that, they can kind of structure, a high-low day in the weight room to mirror what's going on in the, on the field. One of the things that we kind of push is, especially in the fall, high-low. We lift 4 days a week: Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. For us in the weight room, Monday, Thursday are high-intensity days, which mirrors Monday, Thursday on the field, which are our high-intensity days. And then we spike the CNS, bring it down a little bit on Tuesday. Wednesday's our off day, spike the CNS, and then kind of bring it back down on Friday. So, I mean, everybody structures practice and weights different, but I think the more they can see that, I think would be beneficial for both of y'all.
Yeah,
And
I
if anybody
appreciate
else
it.
wants to hop in on this, please feel free, because I feel like I'm the only one talking right now.
Brandy, I'll say from somebody that's had different strength coaches at different institutions with different varying, years of experience. And I'm not going to assume much about your scenario, but it does sound like you're dealing with somebody who has a fairly sizable ego. And in my experience dealing with those individuals, it almost goes a long way in showing them that you give a damn, as opposed to caring as much about them not giving a damn. So, for instance, my strength coach here, who I love to death and I get along really well with, we have 4 strength coaches and then some GAs and interns for 16 sports. That just doesn't add up well when you end up having to drag some more to football on a given time frame. So his ability to make it to practice is almost non-existent. However, something you wonderful Southern schools don't have to deal with is indoor practice. And our indoor facility is right next to the weight room. So he tries to make it out to every single one of those that we have, regardless of the time of day or what practices he has. But even in that, you're talking about people changing hands almost every other year or every year. That's not really a good time frame for you to be able to develop a meaningful relationship with those individuals. I mean, I'm in my second year here, and him and I are just now talking about a lot more collaboration and doing things. And some of that's based on, hey, you couldn't make it out to practice today. By the way, coach got on them because they were doing shitty in drill A, and they ended up doing X amount more reps or what have you, and just giving him that heads up on the way to lift. Or, some other institutions I've been at, hey, by the way, we did a 6-inning scrimmage today, and then coach pulled out the machines and we did machine pitch for an extra 35 minutes, which is, nonstop, unheard of cardio for the most part. So I think some of those things kind of go a long way in almost, it sounds bad, but managing the personality of the person that you're working with.
Yeah, I appreciate your guys' input. I'm very thankful for that.
And in full transparency, they swept the dogs this year, so they're doing something right.
Oh, yeah, that's how we ended it.
Thinking about it on COVID sucks.
They just did a replay of the last game for our fans to watch the other day. And they had coaches' input and all kinds of stuff. But we got beat out for win of the year in our end of year awards. So apparently taking you guys down wasn't as good as beating App State in football.
Well, if anybody else has anything to chit chat about on those topics, so.
Hey, Jason. This is I just posted on the chat about sharing the screening with the coaching staff. I started collaborating with strength conditioning, and then I agree all discussion 100%. But anyone sharing those screening data with especially pitching coach, if like Mike Reinold said, if you see excess arc motion, stop the throwing progression or just shutting down during a fall. How would you communicate like, pitching stuff, especially, if you see something in the screening data, and then what's the reaction from the pitching coach? If anyone have any thoughts on that?
I have really good input from my pitching coaches when it comes to that. I measure my guys 5 times a year, and I measure all of them, pitchers and hitters. And then if I see any discrepancies, I let the pitching coaches know. And we also have the MODIS sleeves. And so we have that on, I think 8 of our pitchers wear it. And me and the coaches meet every couple weeks and go over the data and see what we're seeing. And it's been really good to kind of go off of the pitching coaches, especially with what their thought process is and what I'm seeing and risk of injury. And we've been able to kind of develop more individualized plans for our players that way.
Mine's a little more informal. It kind of goes to the strength and conditioning coach, obviously, and then me and the coaching staff will have conversations if there's anything that's a gigantic red flag. Hey, this guy really shouldn't be doing a whole lot because he's got X amount of things on his screen that are a problem versus the generic guy that only has some range of motion deficits in his hips or something like that, which in my experience is freaking every one of them. But the thing that I do at the end of the year, which I haven't been blessed with a baseball coach that is anatomy and physiology minded, and therefore they look at some of my numbers and just go, well, I don't understand and I don't want to take the time for you to teach me. But I add a player profile in an injury analysis that I do at the end of the year for, hey, here was the last screening, or if a guy actually bought into it and did it regularly, here's how they improved over the course of the year, to just show A, improvement in metrics, and B, just get them to, buy in or just hit them with it again so that they can take a look at it. All right, ladies and gents. So it looks like we're dying down here. So unless anybody else has anything else. All right. Well, thanks for staying on as long as you guys did. This was surprisingly the longest one we've had so far. The plan for next week is to go back to the Wednesday slot. That will be kind of doubling up with the MLB one later that night. But the plan is to have Josh Ogden and Josh Porter co-present on some PRI topics for us, which I will throw up there. Obviously, I will send this video up onto the YouTube and send it out to the group again. I do need to try and get Mike to send me his slides, which may be a pain since he has a lot of redacted info on there. But if nobody has anything else, enjoy the rest of the week.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep, no problem. Have a good one.
Yes,